Welcome back, everybody. So today is one of those days where I've got the absolute pleasure of talking about a rising indie game, and also a genre that is kind of fascinating in its development dynamics. It's a genre where you can, in a way, stand kind of on the shoulders of giants, but make very, very targeted gameplay innovations. I think it's fascinating. It is, of course, the survival genre, and today we're looking at the game Raft. I mean, how many times have we seen survival games blow up? Very recently in the channel, of course, V Rising. I think a bit of a different scale of project in some ways, but a tremendous success. We then go a little bit back. We've got Valheim. And of course, there have been other games. Indeed, what was until very recently the most wish-listed game on Steam, which obviously has a little bit of a iffy situation with its development. Yeah. That's also a big survival game. So I guess the question then is, what makes Raft unique? How do games like Raft actually come about, and what's the dynamics of the survival genre?
Yeah, why did 100,000 people play it at once? Which is crazy big number.
Yeah,
crazy big number.
I mean, there's a fundamental appeal. I remember now this is going to be a very niche reference, but Lost in Blue 2, I believe. That is a Japanese island survival game that I randomly got on my Nintendo DS when I was young. And
a Konami game, nonetheless.
There you go, a Konami game. I suppose back when they were a bit more respected. And even then, the simple thing of, get a fish, cook the fish with a little, Nintendo DS minigame, get some fish. Very engaging. So we're going to jump into this with Raft and then talk a little bit more about the development environment, because actually I do think that a lot of what helps there be so many survival games or, medieval life sims, things like that, it's also some of the same things that have happened to a few of the rather hilarious, some hilarious projects that get clowned on. So for this, right, Raft, survival crafting game, features solo play, co-op options. You start on just a 2x2 wooden square raft. You've got, you got to hook some debris, get food, start to survive and thrive in a massive open world ocean. So it's that fantasy of being in a survival situation that is something that is so universally appealing. I mean, even go back to Swiss Family Robinson, any of this stuff, right? It's like, there's just something fundamental about it. And I also think, with the way that life is these days, going to a game with nearly no technology, where it's, be it out in the sea or just in the woods chopping down some trees, as Valheim showed us, it is almost this kind of cozy escape.
Yeah, people want that cottagecore life. And this one's a little bit more intense, because I was going to draw a comparison to Castaway, and then I thought, man, he really had it very good on Castaway. In Castaway, he had a whole island as opposed to just a raft.
Yeah, so you are, of course, being attacked by sharks. Actually, pretty damn well, fucking scary. But of course, you need to get your water, you need to get your food, you need to not have your entire raft sink. And one of the reasons why this has been such an instantly compelling game is the compression of scale, right? Because unlike a lot of the games where they're so just open or whatever, Raft benefits from being really simple.
Yeah,
because it's just you and your raft against the world.
Yeah, it almost feels like, immediately thinking about it, I immediately was like, oh yeah, it's like the first time you start playing Vampire Survivors. It's just you and a weapon walking around not getting hit. That's all it is, and that's what's so instantly compelling. There's no mechanical knowledge you need to pick up. There's basically no barrier to gameplay. It is straight up just here, do the very simple things. They're simple, but they're fun.
Exactly. It's easy to tutorialize.
Yep.
It's clear. You can use your normal human intuition to work out what to do next, which in some games is not really the case. I mean, it's why I've been playing a lot of No Man's Sky recently. I suppose technically also a survival game. And they definitely do need to hold your hand quite a bit, because there are a lot of layers of complexity to grapple with in that game. And if you want to see some of the incredible numbers this game has produced, 24-hour peak, 66k, all-time peak, 100k, and just look at that launch trajectory. And then, of course, we see it actually holds those launch numbers, which is an incredibly impressive feat. It truly is. And then if you look at the streaming situation, well, you actually see it's been doing pretty damn well for an indie game, right? And I guess it's the sort of game that is just almost perfect to stream.
You can basically imagine the drama that would be there in a multiplayer setting of just someone's going to tip the raft, other person starts shouting. Good stuff, Good stuff.
And now I think it's time to kind of bring this into the larger topic of the surfacing of indie games.
Yeah.
The various different pathways. So let's take a look then. We've got university assignment. So teams that spawn out of university, technically what we are is like half of that with me and Thomas.
Yeah.
I think an example of that where it is, however, actually successful at the start is Risk of Rain.
Oh, yeah.
That's a university team. I mean, what they achieved with Risk of Rain and Risk of Rain 2 is just incredible. Another one is having a prototype on Itch, which there's been quite a few examples of that, I believe. Loop Hero?
Loop Hero was one, and Vampire Survivors is another one, where you can just go play the game now.
Yeah.
If you want to. It's an old version, but you can play it.
There is the Steam Early Access pathway. Now, that's a fascinating one because of the sorts of games that it actually works with. I suppose in a way I could almost talk about a little bit of advice that I've been giving to a fellow company on the sorts of things that maybe a developer could learn from the Early Access pathway that in a way we sort of did for the Pale Beyond's development, which I think is kind of interesting. And what's really cool, Raft is all of these. It's a university project that gets its prototype on Itch, that gets Steam Early Access for 4 years, so it actually gets development with a live audience who can give real feedback, and then a complete release in June 2022 where the story elements have been completed, and now bam, it's a massive success. So this is a university assignment that, I mean, can you imagine if your final year project ended up like this? Holy shit. So here's from Andre, what he told to PC Gamer in 2018. We were doing a course in university where we were supposed to find a market for a game and deliver a game to that market. Wow. What an awesome uni course.
Hell yeah.
Damn, I mean, compared to the games program we did, this is...
Yeah, I'm actually...
Want to go back in time, it's okay, it worked out grand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as for why they thought it had succeeded at the time then, we've discussed this a lot, and I'm not sure we have an exact answer. We think it's a genre people recognize, the survival genre, but instead of having a vast open land to run for miles, you're trapped in a tiny place that you can expand and make your own. That's what's unique and exciting. And I think one of the things, like when you can almost just make a game as small and as focused as is possible, like you can then apply so much care to that. Like imagine a Valheim that tried to do way more than what Valheim did. Because Valheim was quite notable in not having features and actually having focus and it being a small team. And we see that pay off humongously. We see the exact same here. You look at the positive reviews, that they are there. Now, of course, there are some negative reviews because, yeah, you know, early access survival game. I know it has just property came out. But for some people, an open world crafting game that is, you know, kind of defined by a narrative, that's a disappointment to them. And that just depends the sort of game do you want. Do you want like a big Rust-like situation where just, you know, away you go in that world? Or do you want to live out a fantasy? Because perhaps people who like Rust will be a bit less into this as opposed to maybe Subnautica people.
Yeah, precisely.
As an example, by the way, Subnautica, wow. Gotta play Subnautica. It's a really beautiful game. So we do have the usual. But regardless, it has been a humongous success. And I just want to take you through some numbers here. V Rising, obviously it has its explosive launch, but we see a 24-hour peak of 29,000 players. That's awesome. Valheim, 27,000 people. Valheim was not a flash in the pan. I'm very happy to be able to say that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you see a lot of people like look at, oh, well, this game has lost 50 to 90% of its player base in whatever time, and you're like, that is very quickly started to become a very
movie Nightcrawler.
Yeah, a very drab thing. I'm just yeah, of course it has. That's how games work. That's how they've always worked. You're not going to launch with 100,000 players trying it out and then all try it out at the same time forever. You're going to have that natural drop off, but it's about like how many stick around, and both absolutely and percentage wise. And you're looking there at 10K playing. I think this was earlier today, which is a really bad time for probably playing games.
Awful time.
Yeah. And then that 24-hour peak for Valheim, 27K. Like that's
like
that is
time,
outpacing so many games.
That time is like morning in BST.
Yeah, which is
so like morning for Europe, basically ish. So and when loads of America's asleep.
Yeah, it's like unless all the like Asians are playing it, I guess. Well, I mean, Steam China is still technically separate. So unless Japan's playing it, which I don't think they are. No one else really is. Everyone's
Yeah.
asleep. Like,
We've got The Forest.
Mm-hmm.
28k in the last 24 hours. 20,000 playing whenever we were grabbing our data.
Yeah.
That's also incredible. Don't Starve Together. I had no idea that was still producing numbers like this. And what is even more goddamn impressive is I want you to take a look at that chart. It gets bigger over time. It's growing. Like, that's incredible. Terraria. Now, you blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
Last time I really was booting up Terraria, it was those, I believe those Total Biscuit and Jesse Cox videos from a long time ago.
long time ago.
From what I understand, there's a lot of game in Terraria these days, and we see that with almost 50k in its 24-hour peak. Zomboid, which has really popped off, 26k. Rust, just shy of 100k. Wow. Ark, 136k. And of course, that's only Ark's, Steam version. It's also on the consoles and stuff. So basically, the point here is the survival genre is absolutely humongous. And I think what's interesting about the survival genre too is how well sort of positioned it is for the early access model. Because you can really focus in on what matters. You can focus on your points of differentiation, and then you can kind of lean on established things that you don't really need to tutorialize for your players because they already know it from the genre. That's one of the handy things about genre conventions. They kind of get locked in, and then we can focus on creating unique experiences within that, right? I think that's like what is... I mean, yeah, that's like almost the... So there's a lot of criticism of being overly kind of big in genres, but I think this is one of the strengths of a genre, is like almost a platform for innovation and of continued learning from each other. I think another thing too, an indie team, like making a systems game, if you're a really good systems designer, and it's more of an open sandbox. Now, when it's hard is when you're making a very systems-driven game that really has like a lot of linear or sort of progression-based content, such as like a roguelite. So a really good example, like for an indie team that is just from university to suddenly make Darkest Dungeon, like that's extremely hard. Darkest Dungeon was made by a team of industry veterans. But kind of when you go to the survival genre, I think one of those strengths is like, well, you know what I mean? And you can really like the minimum viable product for a survival game does actually seem to be a bit more achievable. And it's not like you have to have incredibly dense, gear progression and class design and enemy design and combat design, because you just look at Valheim. Very simple on all of those fronts, but it turns out it didn't actually need anything else.
Yeah.
So I think like there's just something to be said for how the survival genre is able to, with a relatively minimal amount of mechanics, laser target a fundamental human fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the connection between the fantasy and the idea of, I guess, like immersion and immersive storytelling, and like players kind of, making their own fun, that kind of emergent narrative stuff of, oh, how am I going to approach this? Especially when you introduce multiplayer into it. And it's like, oh, well, now you have survival group A versus survival group B, and there's just enough toys in the sandbox for this to happen 100 different ways. And because it's a very social driven thing, it's also going to be very interesting. And that's where Raft is interesting, because it's kind of social cooperation. And that can go so many ways. That can go so many ways right, so many ways wrong. I think that's by design extremely simple. And the way I would kind of almost put it is, it's like the difference between designing a super intricate board game, and like, okay, we have to have every single like part of this really perfectly laid out for this progression and for this like sense and stuff. And then we've made some really nice action figures for kids to play, like, I guess, imagine, make believe with. And that's a little bit closer to it. That sounds maybe like it's trying to degrade it for what it is, but it's really not. It's like, that is like super really well designed tools people can have their own fantasy with, which is definitely like, it's less, I guess, work and polish in terms of there's less content to make. It just needs to be super tightly polished and super tightly designed. But if you can do it, like they seem to have here, and all of these games seem to have managed to do, as evidenced by their success.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the lessons of the types of early access development models that work in this genre really do apply quite well to some aspects of development in general. So like recently I've been trying to help a company kind of with just some of their production issues. And some of that basically came down to, kind of run your own internal your own internal early access in a way where, like, it was basically like, okay, you guys are thinking about, like, quests and all this content and all this complex shit. And it's like, no, you need to strip it back to the bare fucking minimum and actually go outward from there with a continuous development model. So with the Pale Beyond, like, our game is, is it survival in that it is a survival fantasy in the situation? Yes, but it's, of course, nothing like, a survival game. We're very much a content driven game, right? So it's, lines of dialogue, artwork, all of that stuff. But even the way that, we chose to develop it was very much almost like an early access. Kind of making the bare minimum thing and working, okay, systems, we're going to add this, add that, and slowly kind of pushing our way forward. So rather than just kind of like, go sit down and literally build the whole game, we basically kind of did it in like iteration passes, just like iteration. It's just one of those things. There's a lot of strong lessons that you can learn from other development models.
Yeah,
I think the early access one, while it can result in a lot of maybe 50% and 60% on Steam whenever things don't go exactly right, there's just a lot of lessons from the approach that I think are super valuable.
Yeah, it's why I generally lament the death of sequels in a lot of video game stuff, like the amount of time it takes from sequel to sequel because so much content needs built that they don't really have time to iterate and learn. They do internally, but not like in a massive scale. And that's the thing where it's like the whole Bruce Lee quote, but like, I fear not the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks, but I fear the man who's practiced a kick 10,000 times. And that's kind of what they're doing a little bit here with the genre itself and also the early access models. Where it's like, yeah, we have this really simple core loop that we're designing. We can just iterate on that and try it again and improve a little bit and do that over and over and over again for so long. And it's playable from the first iteration. And early access supports that model of like, hey, this is pretty good.
Yeah,
but it gets incrementally better over time.
It's an incredible thing of the release format informing the sorts of games that are viable. Because like if the very first version of Craft that gets up in early access is good enough to get a small number of people, even 500 is would be pretty sweet, but like even 500 to buy it.
Yeah, 500 people in a room is a lot of people.
Yeah, that's enough to keep the lights on for a bit.
Yeah.
So some games like that, they would have to pursue an alternative funding model if it were not for early access. And just the fact that this game was able to spend 4 years being developed.
That's why it's almost like it's just been in training for 4 years.
Yeah.
It's Rocky in Rocky 4 where he's up and he's lifting all the stuff. He's throwing the rocks around the snowy mountain. And then he comes down and beats Ivan Drago. Like, sorry for spoilers.
The idea of just saying, hey, publisher, here's our prototype. We're planning to make this for 4 years. A lot of publishers are going to say like, we're kind of looking to fill out like 2.5 years from now, or maybe 4. That's a lot. I suppose for some of the really larger publishers, like that sort of thing's grand, but certainly that's like a big ask and a lot of money. So it's early access actually can be pretty damn awesome. I think it can get a bad rap sometimes, but we just do have so many examples of early access just letting teams do really cool shit that probably would have been way harder to do otherwise.
Especially in the survival genre, because I don't know how many of these games weren't early access, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think most of them were, and it's hard to argue with results like that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously survival genres like one of those things that's like super fundamental, so people will enjoy it a lot. In the same way that the Battle Royale is like a genre. And you can easily see, if you think about it for any length of time and try to think about why the experience is different from other games, you can see why survival games and Battle Royales both fit that nature of, yep, this is something that if you like the loop, you can play for a hell of a long time.
Yeah. So there you go. Raft, the final chapter, developed by Red Beat Interactive, published by Axolotl Games, being developed on Steam Early Access. So I suppose with a viable, revenue-generating model for 4 years, it's now came out to fantastic reviews. Great response from streamers. I've been watching seen a few YouTube videos on it as well. Mm-hmm. And just overall, a real happy situation. So there you go. It's always great when we're able to actually find some great indies to highlight. I'm 100% looking for a way where we can do this, where people will actually watch.
Yeah.
That's always the problem with indie stuff. Like, I think some people will watch this because this game's going really big in Steam, so it's like a newsworthy story. But one of the hardest things to do in games media is actually indies and getting people to click in indies, because you don't know you want to click on it unless you've clicked on it, if you know what I mean. Like, a game could really appeal to you, but you don't recognize its artwork. You don't recognize your name. The next video the algorithm shows you is something you do recognize, so you're probably going to click that instead. And that legit, I know people may self-report. No, I care about indie games. I want to watch indie games. I can tell you for facts that sadly is just not how the numbers actually pan out. So I guess if you have any smart ideas for how we can feature more indies and actually have it be a vaguely viable thing, do let me know, because, man, yeah, just lots of great indie games, and it's kind of hard to get people to pay attention to them.
Just have to Trojan horse it. Like, here's a new game by Activision Blizzard. Asterisk, not actually.
That's it. Yeah, okay, right, there you go.
Thank you very
Raft,
much.
what's your experience been? Certainly, I need to find some time away from just chilling out in No Man's Sky, which I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at that, but I've been checking out all the new content, all the new things they've done with that game, and it's actually pretty damn cool. So anyway, that's it from us. Have a great day. Goodbye.